Okay, so the third element is actually my favorite one, and it's the define element. And what we're going to talk about here is defining your career that you want and defining your identity, and then again, translating your strengths into assets for an employer. So let's start off with the define the career that you want.
So, yeah, and to define that, and it's simple, and we're not just going by the vague aspect. It's basically that you're starting an entire new career. Mm-hmm. Right? And people hear other people talk about it all the time where it's like, oh, I have 2 retirements, or I have, I did time in doing this, and then I did time in doing that, and so I have an aspect of it. So what we want to do is we want to define to where your second career wants to go. So your military career is done, all right? And again, it's not discrediting it in any way. It's not diminishing it. It's just the fact that it's over and we're doing a new beginning. So now, within this new beginning and setting our new goals and putting everything in aspect of what we want it to be, let's define our new aspect of where we want our career to go, right? Mm-hmm. So within that, let's look at the end of that career of what we want to do. What do we want as our outcome? Do we want to be a chief pilot? Do we want to be a chief inspector? Do we want to be a chief operating officer? Do we want to, where do we want to end up at whatever time period that may come about as our second career? And it's really logical to think about it that way, because there's going to be stepping stones upon which to get to those aspects, and those will be more of your short-term goals to create, right? So, do I want to be a training captain? Do I want to be a lead mechanic? Do I want to be a floor supervisor? Do I want to go over to quality? Do I want to stay in production? Do I want, and those are all things that have to be defined by everybody in between. And so that's understanding what your new career is going to be. Now, what we have to do is translate that information, right, in defining our identity.
Well, before we go on that identity, what I like to do is when you're defining the career that you want, maybe you don't know what you want. And I find a lot of people when they're in a different season of life or transitioning to that new season, and we're going to touch on the identity piece next, but if you're not really sure what you want to do, I like to fall back to, start asking yourself questions like, what time do you want to wake up in the morning, right? Because if you're like a night person, maybe you want to work a night shift. Well, that's totally different. I mean, there's specific careers that you would be working nights, right? So once you wake up, where do you want to have your cup of coffee, right? Is that at home? What does that look like? Is that on the way in the car? Are you stopping off and getting something at a coffee shop?
Right.
And then how are you getting to work, right? Are you commuting? Are you not? Are you 100% remote? Are you going to the airport and that's your final destination, or are you going to the airport and then you're flying somewhere? I mean, these are the things that needed to be defined. But then, what time are you having lunch? Are you having lunch with clients? Are you having lunch by yourself? Are you packing it? Or these are things like, what time do you get off work, right? When's the end of the day? And I think it's kind of a backwards way of thinking about it, because if you just pick a title and you're like, that's what I want, you'll get it. But if you're not really sure what your end goal is, you can kind of figure that out first by really just kind of answering these questions, and that opens up a whole new path of something that you didn't think about before.
Right. And so the aspect of the visualization, in which that's, and it's what it is, it's visualizing, right, your path of what you want to do. What exactly, and to fill in the details. So people can dream an aspect on many different things. Somebody can have a dream car, somebody could have a dream house, they could have a dream property. They can dream and add so many details onto what their dreams are, right? But if you tell somebody to do the same thing with their career aspect, they fall short.
They draw a blank. So so visualizing, your dream car, but do your dream career. And for some people, maybe that's just creating your own business. There is nothing that fits you, so maybe you create a business around you, and that's kind of going down a whole other path that we're not going to cover in here. But if you can imagine that, whatever you imagine and you strive for it, you don't stop, you're going to get it. So make sure that you know what the end goal is and keep on striving for it, because no matter what it is, it's just a matter of time and you'll get it. And then and the other part of, a new season is rolling into define your own identity. And let me just talk about this real quick because it's super important, because if you think about it, when you're transitioning out of the military, you're no longer, like for me, when I got out of the military, I was no longer a captain, right? I was, still a nurse, no longer a captain. And with that came I had a little bit of identity attached to that. So, you may hold, kind of a high rank, and people are looking up to you now, this new season of life. If you don't truly know who you are, you're going to have that identity crisis, you know?
Right.
So.
And so within that, there's the aspect of, you're right, you're in a season of transition, okay, and you have to come to grasp with what your new identity is, right? And so how do you keep it all together in one? And that's what's really difficult. That's what a lot of people, I think, internally struggle with, right? And so it's the same aspect of, I have to set the hero to the side and I have to be a person. I have to stop being a soldier, right? And now I'm an individual.
Right.
Right. So in the team aspect, that's one thing that's hard to grasp, and it's difficult. And like I said, so all of this plays into the correlation with how we don't want to hit that panic button. We don't want to run into trouble. We don't want to hit a mental stability or a static aspect in our mental capabilities, right? And we want to keep going. So within that, there's tools to help you identify, right, who you are, or what your strengths are, or what your abilities may be. And some of them haven't, and not everybody is key or prone to understanding what their strengths are, right? But if you take a number one question that's probably asked in interviews over and over and over again, it's like, hey, define your strengths. What do you think is your biggest strength? What do you think is your biggest aspect? How can you help my organization? What can you bring to the table? Why would you want to work for us? And what can you provide us? And so within that, one of those, for example, is the Clifton Strength Finders 2.0, right?
My favorite.
So, and in what it is, it'll break down 34 different identifiable strengths that you have, and it will actually list them. So this is your number 1 strength all the way to number 34 strength, right? In an all positive aspect, but it helps you identify, what your top strengths are. And so how that plays into an organizational fit and what an organization can do with those strengths that you possess. In other words, what services, how you can provide a better value to the organization that you want to be part of. And gives you the confidence, especially during the interview process, to say, hey, this is me, right? And my strength, no matter, if you have, for example, with me, is ideation is my number 1. So I'm constantly thinking of new ideas. I'm constantly thinking of new aspects, new approaches. And yes, as a strength, and there's a downside, right? Because you have to know what ideas do I chase and which ones do I let go, right?
That's the hard part.
So we don't want to sit there and start chasing rabbits all over the place, right? Because once again, the time equals money, and the money is the value of what you bring to something. So you don't want to sit there, and how I do it is, is obviously the return on investment is the biggest measurement that you're going to have. And so individualization would be another strength. And what it is seeing the unique talents, abilities, and skills in other people. And from a management perspective, if you possess that, right, then you understand that how I explain it to individuals, that I manage over, is very simple. I'm going to exploit your strengths, and I'm going to build on your weaknesses, right? Yep. And so what does that mean? It means that, hey, I know these are your strengths. I know these are what you can accomplish, and this is what you're good at. In the same notion, your strengths are somebody else's weaknesses.
Right, absolutely.
And so I'm going to take those, and at times when it's available, hey, I want you to help this person, work on this. Well, this person may be strong in these categories or these areas, and they're going to help you with that. But when it's go time and when it has to get done and everything else, yes, I'm going to exploit your strengths.
Yeah.
And I'm going to abuse it. And it's the way that the work gets accomplished and how it gets done.
Well, let me give an example of that, because my number 1 strength is adaptability. And there you'll learn that, kind of going back a little bit is, the Clifton Strengths 2.0, it's an online assessment and it's a timed assessment. I ask you a lot of questions, very different than any other assessment I've ever taken out there, like the positive personality profiles. There's so many different things, but what I learned on paper was my number one is adaptability. And I kind of wondered why, every time I'm in a situation, I'm always looking kind of for the next situation. And what that really means is I really enjoy change. Well, that's an incredible asset, because I know there's a lot of the population is they don't like change. They like things just to stay the same. They're okay doing the same thing, driving the same way to work, working in their cubicle, workload's the same, working with the same people. Oh my goodness, that would drive me nuts. But what I also learned, and when I got recently hired by a new employer, that was one of the strengths, and we'll talk about translating your strengths into assets for an employer, but that, and I guess we can kind of segue into that, but that was one of the things. They said, why are you the best candidate? And I said, the number one thing is, my adaptability. I love change, but also I'm really good at helping others through the change. And I've actually been complimented about this, and it didn't really put it together until I got my assessment back from the Clifton Strengths, is I can look at others and I can see their strengths, and I can really encourage them and show them, hey, you're really good at X, Y, Z. I mean, it's just something I can kind of pick out at. But then I show them that, man, you could use those strengths in the new change. So it really helps them, just really adapt to that new change and move beyond there. And that's the other thing too. Ideation just happens to be my number two strength. And so me and you are just constantly coming up with ideas. So, within that, the other thing that I learned is, I'm a learner. I love the process of learning. I will learn anything I don't know. And learner is not one of your top 5. So I remember when I would send you things, hey, you should read this and do this, and you didn't do it. After you got your strengths back, that's exactly what I wanted to see, was where was learner, and it wasn't one of your top 5, so that's how come I knew. And just with like a husband and wife communicating, one of the things I wanted to read yours, because I really wanted to see your blueprint, and that's kind of what I look at, is this whole strength is kind of like your core, your blueprint is how you think and how you naturally are to the core. And I remember when I read yours, I read your top 5, and I'm like, man, I knew I was married to a champion, but now I really know it because it's on paper. And that's amazing. I mean, this is not like a relationship couples thing, but it absolutely can be, because I think a lot of people look at people's weaknesses and say, yeah, you have to make those stronger. And maybe in a job type situation, yeah, maybe that's not so bad. But instead of constantly trying to focus on your weaknesses and make them stronger, it's better kind of like what you do when you're working with people is, there are people that are good at one thing and there's people that are good at another. And if you pair them up, that's where you really make a dynamic team. And so, I mean, just us working together, I mean, there's things, you're an extrovert, I'm an introvert, you don't like doing interviews, I'm fine with them, but together we're actually able to pull more things off. So I think that the number one thing is, if you don't know who you are in the next season of life, you're going to go through identity crisis, you're going to go that midlife crisis, you're going to do things trying to struggle to find who you are. When you can go online and you can pay like $19.99, get your top 5, or pay the whole, $49.95 and get all of your 34 strengths in order, and it's dead on. I mean, if you're accurately answering these questions, to me, it is like dead on, and that really boosts your confidence, and you know who you are. So when, like for me, if somebody asks me, tell me about yourself, or you're meeting somebody for the first time, it may seem weird at first, but I tell people, like, man, I'm the person, I love change. I am the idea person. I have, my beliefs are really high, my responsibility is really high, meaning I do what I say I'm going to do. And that's really important, and that kind of rubs off on other people. I expect them to be like that, but realizing not everybody has responsibility as their top 5, so maybe they say they're going to do it and they don't.
Right.
And that's
the thing that I don't whether or not people even include the fact that they would conceive that responsibility is a strength.
Yeah.
So and that's the education factor that it exposed to you. It brings out things that you may not even be aware of.
Yeah, most people aren't. I think most people are not. I think that's the number one thing that people ask is, who am I and what is my purpose? And along this line of, I just believe that when you can define the career you want by asking yourself the right questions and you know who you are, so you're not filling the wrong bucket, because there'll be opportunities that may sound good, but for me, I need to do something that has deep, purposeful meaning, right? So within that, if there's an opportunity that comes along, maybe it's a job opportunity, maybe it's a business opportunity, and it doesn't meet or doesn't match those top fives, just pass it on by, because you may temporarily be happy because it fills maybe the money bucket, right? Maybe it's, but then it doesn't fulfill the other things. So then that's why you may get a job and 6 months later you're like, man, I don't really like this, but I don't know why. Why am I not appreciative? I mean, I got the job I wanted. Maybe it was local, but you didn't really know what you wanted. So to know what you want, really define what you want, and then define your identity, you match those two, that's amazing. But
and you bring that up because there's a piece that I wrote earlier, a little bit back on and it was the values, right? And it's understanding your values and understanding the values of an organization, right? And understanding that those values should line up.
Yeah.
Your values should match of your employer or where even a potential employer, right? If those values, if they're out of sequence, out of whack, if they're completely polar opposites, then it's probably not a good fit, But understanding your values and what we're talking about your morals, your ethics, and what you bring to business and everything that goes within that realm. And it's because of the fact that you want to work for an organization that wants to bring the same thing to the table. You want, from the management aspect is, obviously, as an employer, you don't have to work so hard to get buy-in from your employees if they're already matching your values, right? I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not trying to pitch you anything. I'm not trying to bring you into my organization and change you, right? That's more incredible HR work that shouldn't be required. And from the employee's standpoint to the employer is like, so why are you trying to change me?
Right.
So, and it's a conflict within yourself. But what that brings into is so how do you translate your strengths into assets for an employer, right? And that's a hard definition to come up with, to create, because knowing that every employer is unique, knowing especially when you get into, and what we'll focus on just for a second, is if we talk about the rotary wing aspect of the world, right? Where we sit there and look at aviation in a whole, and we look at, so when you get into, say, the EMS market, right? Or you're getting into the oil and gas market, or you're looking at all these different avenues, and how your strengths, what they bring to the table, right? So if you're a critical thinker, if you can do an outstanding risk assessment, if you can sit there. So for EMS, for example, I know I'm tired of it. The industry's tired. Everybody is would love to just not have any more accidents and incidents and fatalities involving EMS aircraft, right? Especially ones that are decision-based, And I think it's one of those things and it's almost scary, that if you don't have the idea and the concept of how you're performing your decision-based process on deciding for the flights that you're going to accept and the flights that you're not going to accept, that what the outcome of that potentially could be. And that's part of that value base, right?
Your strengths.
It is. And it's one of those things to understand how it influences your daily decisions and what you're doing, right? And especially the responsibility that we're giving into that.
With that's basically the define. And the next element we're going to talk about is optimize. And that's really talking about your social media, displaying the image that you want to project on the social media and that sort of thing. So optimize will be next.
Yep.